you haven't heard the news, this week GGPoker bought the World Series of Poker for $500 million. Despite the deal, the WSOP's live events will continue to be hosted by Caesars in Las Vegas for the next 20 years. GGPoker will now be operating WSOP.com, the online poker platform, although it's not clear yet what kind of changes they will bring to that platform. I saw many people this week speculating that this may lead to more states in the US regulating online poker. However, the press releases around the sale seem to specifically state that this would not happen. WSOP.com will be restricted from operating outside of Nevada, New Jersey, Michigan, and Pennsylvania for the foreseeable future. So maybe this will help down the road, but right now, it doesn't look like more states will open up anytime soon. My feelings on the news are mixed. On the one hand, it feels like if online poker is going to expand in the US, GGPoker is probably the best brand to do it, since they are currently the clear #1 site in terms of world online poker traffic. On the other hand, I've been a vocal critic about GG's extremely high rake in the past, and I'm concerned that professional poker players could end up worse off even if GG succeeds in growing the game because of their business model. The biggest concern for me is the notorious rake hike that GG attempted back in April of 2023. Basically, they nearly doubled the rake at 5K&L, or 25.50, without notifying players, to a staggering 7 big blinds per 100. To give some context, 7 big blinds per 100 is approximately the rake for the average 100 NL game online. So they were trying to charge the same rake at 50 times the stakes. This made the games totally unbeatable, and it immediately triggered a boycott. The high-stakes players on that site organized and agreed with one another that they just wouldn't play until GGPoker at least changed the rake back to its previous levels. And I believe it was a couple of weeks during negotiations that almost no high-stakes games ran on GG because the boycott was almost 100% effective. And it was pretty bizarre and funny to see. Sometimes the lobby would be completely empty except for 1 to 2 recreational players. So eventually GG conceded, and they lowered the rake back to the previous levels, which in my opinion are still way too high. But they have actually gone back and increased the rake slightly for shorthanded games at high stakes. Right now, the base rake sits at around 3.5 big blinds per 100, according to PrimeDope.com, and that's just shy of $2 per hand at those stakes. Before we dive deeper into the current situation on GGPoker, I wanted to tell you about my program, the Mobius GTO Stat Checker, which is now available for both MTTs and cash games. This program automatically compares your stats to solver data and pinpoints where you're off track. Another way that this program has been extremely useful in my coaching is by using it to assess how beatable my students' games are. In the videos that come with the course, I show how to run reports on recreational players to show, among other things, how many of them there are in your games. And I also show how to run reports on regulars to see what the average win rate is for regs in your pool. Later in this episode, I'll go deeper into the math behind how you can actually figure out how beatable your games are. But you can click the link in the show notes to learn more about the stat checker and purchase a copy for MTTs or cash games today. Back in February, which feels like about 15 minutes ago, I created a post on X about GG's rake structure after they implemented some new policies on data mining. It received about 250,000 views, which makes it the most popular post I've done on any social media platform by far. I will post a link to that in the show notes as well. In that post, I showed the top players on GG by number of hands played at 200 NL and 1K NL, so 1, 2, and 5, 10. The majority of these players were losing before Rakeback, and only a few players managed to win at more than about 2 big blinds per 100. Now again, this post was sorted by the number of hands each player played, so it was looking at players who had played the most hands on the site. But I also did a follow-up post, which received another 100,000 views, where I compiled a bunch of data myself to compare the average win rate of all regs on GG and on PokerStars, not just the regs who had played the most hands. I did this because an obvious counterpoint to my first post is that the regs that I was looking at were just leaderboard grinders. And these guys expect to lose to the Rake, but they will turn a profit after Rakeback because GG has these leaderboards and a Rakeback system, which gives you quite a bit of Rakeback. But the results of my second study showed that the average reg on PokerStars at 200 NL won at a rate of 2.4 big blinds per 100. The average reg on GGPoker lost at 3.4 big blinds per 100. So that's nearly a 6 big blind discrepancy. I did the same experiment for 500 NL and I got similar results. The average reg on Stars won at 1.8 big blinds per 100, and the average reg on GG lost at 3.3 big blinds per 100. Now, like I said, GGPoker offers much better Rakeback than Stars, but there's no way that that can account for the 5 to 6 big blind per 100 gap in the win rates. Most players on GG that I speak to get around 3 to 4 big blinds per 100 in Rakeback when all is said and done. Whereas Stars players report to me that they tend to get around 1 big blind per 100 back. So even if we assume that the players on GG are all getting 4 big blinds per 100 in Rakeback, and the players on Stars only get 1, the average win rates on Stars are still 2 big blinds per 100 higher at 200 NL than they are on GG. Now, my issue with this is not so much that the rake is high. A company can set the rake to whatever level that they want, and players can decide whether or not they want to play there. My issue is more so about the lack of transparency with the rake and how much rake players actually get. GGPoker's Rakeback system is so complicated that many players that I speak to don't really even understand how much rake they're getting. The site uses something called a PVI system, which stands for Player Value Index, and this basically assesses how skilled you are and adjusts your Rakeback accordingly. To try to get an explanation, I did some searching and I found an article on worldpokerdeals.com where they explain that this index ranges from 0 to 2, and if you're an amateur, your score will be closer to 2, and if you're a winning player, your score will always be less than 1, and the worst possible score that you can get, the least Rakeback, is actually 0.1. So the site assesses your skill and gives the losing players more Rakeback and the winning players less Rakeback. But no one actually really knows how the calculation is done on the back end, and apparently this can be updated up to every month. So from one month to the next, your income as a player can change quite a bit based on this mysterious calculation that the site is doing. And that's extremely important, again, because the site is designed so that a lot of your income is coming from the Rakeback. It's not something that's just negligible. Now, a really interesting thing to note is that very recently, and I think that this story kind of went under the radar a little bit, but a group of people led by a 2+2 user who goes by the name of Tyler RM. This guy was also the guy who exposed the super user on GGPoker this year. They found that there was a group of players who found a way to really exploit this PVI system. Basically what they did was they would kind of team up, and imagine you have 2 winning regulars, but one of the regular dumps all of his chips to the other regular periodically. So his win rate looks like it's negative, and therefore he will get much more Rakeback through this PVI system. But he's gaining all of that extra Rakeback without losing anything because his losses are going to his buddy, and then they share the Rakeback and they end up getting far more rakeback than they should be under the site's rules. I'll post a link to all of the data on 2+2 in the show notes, but basically it just goes to show that if you're going to run a rakeback system like this, you have to be really careful on the operator side to monitor all the players and make sure that they're not taking advantage of it. Anyway, to bring this back to the average player on GG, the average professional player, my concern is that they end up playing on this site, not really understanding how the rakeback system works and all of the various fees that they're paying, which I didn't even go into all of the different sort of jackpots and other rake systems that are in play. And they end up, number one, just making less money overall. And number two, they end up in a really vulnerable spot because the site controls how much rake the players are getting charged, and they can change that at any time. And if we go back to the ridiculous rake hikes that they've made in the past, I think it is fair to assume that they do want the rake to be higher. And the rake, in my opinion, is already really bad because there are basically no stakes on that site where regulars can really battle one another in a way that makes any sort of financial sense. I'm not saying that regulars don't ever battle each other. Sometimes they still do, but it's really not in their best interest to do so. What we have currently on GG is a site where you really need at least one recreational in order to make sure that you're actually winning in that game. And I'll go into the math behind this. The magic number is 30. 30 big blinds per 100 happens to be the average loss rate of recreational players in online poker. So every 100 hands they play, they will on average lose 30 big blinds off of their stack. And this number is post-rake. So that means that a certain amount of those losses go to the rake. And let's say for easy math, we'll say that that's 5 big blinds per 100. The rest of those losses go to the regulars. Now let's assume that this is a 6 max table. So you've got 1 recreational player and 5 regulars. If there are multiple recreationals at the table, the math is a little bit more complicated. So we'll just stick with this simple scenario. In this case, each reg would make, on average, 5 big blinds per 100 from the rec. Now, it also depends on the orientation of the seats. So the regulars who are in direct position on the recreational are going to make a little bit more. The players who are directly to the right of the recreational are going to make a little bit less. So if each regular is winning 5 big blinds per 100 from the recreational player at the table, and the rake is also 5 big blinds per 100, that means that the average win rate for the regulars at that table is 0 big blinds per 100. So you'll have the best regular at that table, maybe the top 2, making some sort of profit. And then you'll probably have 1 or 2 regulars breaking even, and then you'll have 1 or 2 regulars who are actually losing in that game, even though they think that they have an edge. Now, the loss rate of recreational players is also cultural. If you go to the West, like the United States or certain European countries, you'll find that the recreational players tend to lose more. And if you go to Asian countries, you'll find that the recreational players tend to lose less. So I've seen the average recreational players' loss rate usually range between 20 and 40 big blinds per 100. And since a lot of GG Poker's recreational players come from Asia, a lot of these games actually look better than they are because, yeah, you have 1 recreational, maybe 2 at the table, but they're only losing at about 20 big blinds per 100. And so you can see how the math would change and become a lot worse for the regulars at our hypothetical table in that case. In online cash games, the loss rate of the recreational players mainly comes from how many hands they play pre-flop. So it's the VPIP. That is really what drives everything. And you'll see that players who are tighter, recreational players who play less hands, lose at a much lower rate. And if the VPIP gets to 50 plus, that's when you start to see recreational players who have astronomical loss rates. These high VPIP recreational players can lose at 70 big blinds, even 100 plus big blinds per 100. So every time you sit down at the table, you have to do this math of, do I have a recreational at the table? How much do I expect this recreational player to lose? And how much am I paying in the rake? And how profitable can I expect to be as a result? My issue with this is that if you have to have a recreational player at every single table in order to be profitable, even at high stakes, that makes poker a really predatory game. Whereas what we love about poker is that it is a game of skill, and it sort of toes the line between gambling and sport. We understand that if players did not play this game for fun and there were no recreational players, we would all just be losing to the rake. But we also compete fiercely against the other regulars, and we even battle against the other regulars without recreational players at the table. And for players who don't ever battle with the other regulars, they will only play with another recreational player at the table. We have a term for that. It's called bum hunting. It's a very negative term because most professional poker players that I speak to look down on this approach to the game. They feel that there's no honor in playing poker this way. But under the system that GGPoker has in place, many of the regulars don't have much of a choice. Bum hunting and predatory behavior, by the way, is actually strictly against GGPoker's terms of service. So they can issue you a warning or even ban you at any time for bum hunting, when, ironically, bum hunting is what is necessary for many players to survive the rake on GGPoker. So as GGPoker enters the US markets, I'm sure that they understand that the hourly rate for players in regulated US states right now is very, very good. It's much better than what the average hourly rate is globally for professional poker players. So I think they will see that, and they will fully understand that they can jack up the rake in these regions, and people will still show up to play because the games will still be profitable. They'll just be much less profitable than they were before. So that is the biggest change that I foresee, in the immediate future, is more rake, at least on the WSOP sites. There is a potential silver lining here, though, which is that maybe this company can help grow poker in the United States, particularly online poker, so much that we actually do push toward a more regulated poker landscape where more and more states open up. Perhaps even California opens up, which would change everything. Again, I don't think that's in the near future, but I currently don't really see a pathway for that to happen in the United States. And so GGPoker entering these markets does give me a little bit of hope that maybe someday something like that could happen. Whether or not you think that risk is worth taking, I'll leave that up to you to decide. My goal is not to vilify GGPoker, even though I'm clearly not the biggest fan of their business model, which is transforming online poker into much more of a Rakeback race where you have to lose to the house or just barely break even and then hope that you turn a significant profit through some obscure leaderboard system. I don't like that, but they have the right to run their business however they want. My goal with this episode is just to help the average poker player be a little bit more educated on how profitable they can be in a particular game, given the rake that is being charged. Because we've proven in the past that we can force these sites to lower the rake if the players just sit out. But if the players continue to show up, the sites have no reason to not just make the rake higher and higher and force us to resort to the bum hunting and the predatory behavior that we all abhor. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you like this episode, be sure to share it with other players and subscribe to this podcast. And until next time, good luck at the tables.